And I kind of just had this epiphany of like, hey, I can put my M&A background and my banking background together with the e-commerce.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the new episode of Ecom 365. I'm co-founder and CEO of ShopAgain.io. For this episode, I have a new guest with me, Isaac. Isaac is an e-commerce business owner himself. He also works with website closers, where he helps other e-commerce owners improve and sell their store. He is a surfer, a downhill skier, an athlete, and has finished 23 triathlons. Isaac has four undergrad degrees and an MBA. Now let's hear the rest from the man himself. Thanks for joining us, Isaac. How are you doing today?
Hey, Marudi, I'm great, man. Thanks. How you doing?
I'm doing great. Your intro was pretty mouthful. So you tell me a little bit about how you got into so many things.
Like anything else, I guess I one at a time. You know, the the surfing. I started surfing in college in Costa Rica, and I do mostly wake surfing. Live on a lake, and I've been a downhill skier my whole life, and I was always liked outdoor sports, and that got me into the triathlons. And that was just I did one and kind of got hooked, and you know, uh, it's actually I think I'm actually up to 26 now or something like that. So um, yeah, so that was just a kind of an interesting I guess athletic adventure, but yeah, most of my time now is focused on the business brokerage. That's kind of where I'm keeping my focus currently.
So I realized that you started your career as a finance person. Then how did you get into building your own e-commerce stores and helping others sell their e-commerce store?
Yeah, so right, um, I started in commercial banking, and I actually spent 20 years in commercial banking, and most of my focus during that part of my career was in mergers and acquisitions. I did acquisition financing and deal structure. Got my MBA while I was working at PNC Bank at the time, and I just always liked doing deals and putting companies together, and that was kind of, I guess, a passion that I had or an interest that I had, and kind of the financial engineering that goes along with that. But then 6 years ago, I got interested in e-commerce, and I, was reading about Amazon, and I started doing some kind of retail arbitrage where I would buy bulk lots of stuff and sell it on Amazon, and just kind of, I guess, learned, the Amazon ecosystem, and learned how Seller Central worked, and a little bit about inventory management and brand. At the time they didn't even have brand registry, I don't think, but kind of brand restrictions. And I pretty quickly realized I wanted to have my own brand. And so I started up a pet products brand. It was LED dog collars and children's toys. I did kind of rechargeable glow sticks and LED toys basically. And grew that. Had two separate brands. Grew that, and I started to think, hey, this is what I really want to do. I want to be involved in e-commerce. I saw kind of where the market was going. I liked the growth. I liked how I was able to run the companies. I enjoyed doing it from home. It was new and kind of exciting to figure out kind of how to drive growth in these e-commerce brands, and just kind of learning how Amazon worked and how they fulfilled the inventory. I got really interested in that, and I started looking for another FBA brand to acquire. What I plan to do was buy another brand and add it into my own Amazon store, and that led me to start looking at these FBA brands that were for sale. This is probably going back now 4 or 5 years. And I looked at a lot of different brokerages, and I found website closers through that process. And I liked the website closers platform. I liked kind of the way they had put their deals together, and I started looking at deals. I looked at a lot of different deals, met a few of the website closers brokers at that time. I was working with a guy named Tom Howard, who now is a good friend of mine. Um, and and I kind of just had this epiphany of like, hey, I can put my M&A background and my banking background together with the e-commerce and focus on this. And so instead of buying another Amazon store, I invested in website closers. And so that's what I do full time now. I've sold my brands, and I now work with sellers of e-commerce and technology businesses to help them, from the planning stage all the way through execution on their exit. We're listing a new company for sale every day on our platform, and we've been closing transactions, kind of at the fastest pace in the website closer company history. So things are definitely going well. The market has been very strong. 2021 was a great year. We're seeing a little bit of weakness in financial performance kind of in Q2, Q3 22. I think that's pretty well known in the industry, but there continues to be a robust amount of both buyers and sellers in this space. So we're having fun. We're working on a lot of deals, and we got some really interesting stuff coming to market soon.
Okay. So tell me a little bit more about the final part you told. So when the pandemic started, and throughout the pandemic, and now that things seem to be coming back to track, how was this trend of buying and selling changing in that period?
So in March of 2020, and I was just getting into working with website closers. At the beginning of the pandemic, really M&A kind of stopped completely for 4 to 6 months. I mean, deals that were in progress pretty much got put on hold, and new deals, were not being launched, and nobody was buying. So it was kind of like a full stop. I think, it was nobody knew what was going on.
Yeah.
Everybody was scared. And so the enemy of mergers and acquisitions is uncertainty. And that was kind of the height of uncertainty, kind of as we know it. So it stopped for a few months.
Yeah. So I'm guessing that was moving from the buyer side, because seller were still interested. Selling was in their best interest to counter the uncertainty, but buyer just wanted more predictability.
Yeah. Well, what happens, and this kind of makes sense if you think about it in financial terms too, is the greater the level of uncertainty, the higher the risk premium, and therefore the lower the price. And so, there were a lot of buyers that would have loved to have sold at the multiples that we were getting right before the pandemic, but nobody was paying those multiples. So there was not a lot of, or there were a lot of sellers that would have liked to have sold, at the multiples that we were getting right before the pandemic, but there were no buyers paying those multiples. So, you don't have that. You don't have that point where you can make a deal, and so there just weren't any deals going on right then. Now, fast forward, going through 2020, probably by Q3, Q4 2020, I think we kind of had a sense that of the magnitude of what was going on. M&A started to come back, and then 2021 just ended up being a total banner year. The floodgates opened, stock market was strong. A lot of the aggregators that had come into the space over the last few years had a tremendous amount of funding and liquidity. So, it was full court press, from then on.
Okay. And has that trend been going up this year?
Well, we've seen some changes this year, candidly. We have a few of the largest aggregators, especially in the Amazon FBA space, have essentially stopped buying companies. Either they've run into some financial problems, they don't have the liquidity or access to the liquidity that they had 12 months ago. And so those guys are really, I would say, pumping up multiples in the space, right? Because when you have that type of competition with large players who have, hundreds of millions of dollars of capital that they have to put to work, they push multiples up a lot in 2021. And so, we saw a lot of brands last year getting 5, 6, 7 multiples on the trailing 12 months free cash flow. And when you take those kind of big buyers out of the market, you don't have as much price competition and on the buy side. And so we've seen multiples come back kind of to what I would say is a little bit more normalized level. We're still trading. I saw a report on e-commerce M&A that was actually put together by one of the aggregators that had assembled a bunch of data, but the average multiple paid for FBA businesses through the first 2 quarters of 2022 was 4.5x. Which is still a very healthy multiple if you look, kind of on a 5-year run rate, and that's pretty much what we're seeing now. Is that we've come off a little bit of the peak. I think a little bit of the bubble has, it hasn't popped, but maybe some of the air came out of it. But there's still buyers. We're still when we're launching new deals, I'm getting 100, sometimes 150 NDA requests in the first few days. From buyers who want to look at the company, and so that's kind of how I personally measure the velocity in the market. Is when we launch a deal, how many buyers inquire about that deal in the first week, and it's a pretty good read for me, instantaneous read if we've got the company priced right, if it's interesting, if we've positioned the key performance indicators in a way that the market responds well to.
Okay, so tell me about what do you look for in a brand who wants to sell? So, and I want you to cover 2, 3 things. So, first, what kind of revenue you expect, and what other KPIs you deeply care about, and this would be very interesting for audience who want to sell their brand in the future.
Yeah. So there's a number of things that drive valuation, and that we look at when we're getting ready to market an e-commerce brand in particular. So the revenue, of course, is one of the first things buyers look at, right? And so not just the total amount of revenue, but the direction, the trend of the revenue. So buyers want to see growth in revenue. Margins are very important as well. So both the gross margin and the net income margin. A strong gross margin business shows that the products that they're selling are very profitable. Yeah. That may or may not translate to a net income margin. The operating expenses of the business are largely controlled by the owners. So sometimes the case we'll have a product with a great gross margin, but maybe their advertising spend is one of the things we see quite frequently is the advertising spend is really eating up the majority of the margin, kind of between the gross profit line and the net income line. And so then we look for stability in the cash flow. I said uncertainty is the enemy of M&A. And that really comes back to the certainty or stability of the cash flows, because what a buyer is doing is they're paying a multiple on the cash flow of the business, the EBITDA, or what we call the SDE, the seller discretionary earnings. It's the cash flow that's available to a buyer after the sale. So we'll add back things like seller discretionary expenses that the buyer wouldn't have to pick up. But that stability of the cash flow and the predictability of the cash flow are one of the main things that drives the multiple. And so when we look at predictability of cash flow, one of the best ways to gauge that is the repeat customer rate, the recurring customer rate, and that goes to the higher your repeat customer rate, the greater the long-term value is of those customers, because they come back and they buy multiple times. And as you know well, you don't have to pay to acquire them for the second purchase, or at least you're not paying nearly as much. You spend a lot of money to get a customer in the door of your store, and then you want them to continue to repeat the purchase. You want them to be brand loyal. And so there's a big focus on the brand, and if the brand resonates with a certain demographic or consumer, that you can build and scale this kind of recurring purchase habit with. And then then we look at a lot of the KPIs that I think your clients look at: the customer acquisition cost, the lifetime value of the customer, the percentage of revenue spent on advertising, and that all goes into really margin profile of how profitable the business is. And the more profitable it is, of course, the more money that you have to invest in things like inventory that you need to scale the business. So those things all play together. And now it's not uncommon that a business doesn't check every one of those boxes. The brands that check all the boxes are extremely valuable, and we see those, and those are great, and those are fun to sell. I think where I feel like a lot of my work comes in is when we've got a brand that maybe checks 3 or 4 out of 5 boxes or 6 boxes, and then how do we position that? How do we explain to a buyer the value proposition of the business and what things they could do to improve it, and how they can extract value from that acquisition? Because this is really a acquisition of a business is a financial transaction. So you're looking for a certain financial profile. Every buyer has different things that they look for and focus on, or there's maybe different types of buyers. Some buyers are looking for just the total amount of free cash flow. Some are looking for margin profile. Some are looking for brand scalability. But buyers have different kind of priorities, and so we have to be able to tell the story really clearly and articulate the value points of that business. And then where we don't see those boxes checked, right? So maybe we see a brand that's profitable, that's making. I'll give you an example, right? We sold a company. It was a cosmetics brand last year. Great growth rate on the business, about an $8 million revenue size business, producing $1.6, $1.7 million in free cash flow. Now, that business was one that I thought of when the first time we talked, because they had grown the business by leveraging Facebook and Google ads, and really just, you could see that the more money they spent on ads, the larger their sales grew, but there was a direct correlation, and the recurring customer rate was pretty low. So one of the things that the buyer was really focused on was, how do you take those 300,000 customers that they had sold a product to? They had at the beginning of the process, they had something like a 12% returning customer rate. How do you go back to those 300,000 customers and meaningfully market to them to get them to come back and purchase again, so that you're not spending, if the average order value on that business was something like $38, and the customer acquisition, I think, was around $17. So they were spending a lot of money to get the customers as a percentage of their total revenue. But that became really a focus of the opportunity for that business, is how do they improve that? And so I actually sent ShopAgain platform to that buyer. This was a year later, but said, hey, this is something that I think you'd be interested in, because they had a bunch of really rich data, but I don't think they hadn't ever gotten to the point of really needing to use it. And so I think that would be really interesting for them to check out some technology that helped them do that.
Thanks for doing that. This is very interesting. I want to learn a little bit more about how the deal closers work. So when a brand approaches you that they're interested in selling, do you look at these check boxes and only accept them if some of the boxes check?
So when we 100% of our business is coming by referral right now, which is great. And so we usually have an initial call with a business owner or founder, and we ask a lot of these questions. We go through some of these KPIs that I've mentioned. We talk about the revenue. We talk about where their opportunities are. We talk about where the challenges are, what problems they've had, and we'll generally do a listing price recommendation or initial valuation. And so At that point, we're analyzing the financial statements. We'll have financial statements, and then we're using all of the kind of operational details and the specifics of the business model to come up with a multiple based on other transactions that we've seen trade in the market recently, and that gives us a range or a listing price range. And so we'll go back to the owner and give them a listing price range. Now we're totally success fee based, so that means that we don't charge any retainer fee. I don't charge an upfront fee. I get paid when my clients get paid, and we do that intentionally. We want to align ourselves at the hip with our clients so that our goal is to maximize their exit price value, and we're not taking any fees until they're getting paid. And so because of that, yeah, we're selective with the deals we take. If it's not a company that I think I can sell, it's not something that I want to spend a lot of time marketing. And so, sometimes those are maybe tough conversations, but I try to be pretty straightforward and frank with clients. And if I think the business is one that we're not able to sell, there are other options in other marketplaces that we can sell some companies that we wouldn't put on the website closers platform. But I think for my business partner and I, we'll spend on kind of, especially in the lower middle market space, it could be hundreds of hours of time to go through the full marketing process, buyer screening, negotiating the letters of intent. And then really where a lot of the work comes in is through the due diligence process, supporting the due diligence and negotiating all of the deal point nits that are involved with getting an asset purchase agreement for a company signed by both buyer and seller. And so, it's a big time investment. We spend a lot of money on the advertising and the marketing of the companies. And yeah, I think we're selective and try to be really realistic with our clients about valuations and our confidence level and our ability to sell a company.
Okay. That really makes a lot of sense. And I kind of got an idea of what KPIs you guys look for, to accept a brand. But is there also a certain price, a revenue range or some other revenue related numbers that you look for, that we look to work with brands who are doing MRR or, in this range?
Yeah, because the multiples vary so dramatically, I don't really think about it in terms of revenue or even cash flow ranges, because a small SaaS business could be worth more than a much larger reseller of a product on Amazon. But we do have a minimum listing price. So right now, I believe our minimum listing price for the website closers platform is $500,000. We are talking about moving that up to $1 million. My average transaction size right now is around $4 million, and on our platform we run deals regularly from 500,000 to 100 million.
Okay. So the brands that you don't choose to work with, what's the most common mistake you see them making?
That's a great question. I think, and it somewhat recently, I think it's been brands who have just had declining revenues and maybe an unrealistic expectation for what price the market's going to pay. When the business is in decline, there's a big risk premium penalty that's assigned to the price, meaning that they're going to get the multiple drops substantially. At some point, there's a buyer for just about every company that's making money. But of course, a buyer doesn't want to buy a company that's going to go to zero, right? So declining businesses are very hard to sell. And hands down, the number one reason I've seen for declining revenues in the e-commerce space over the last 12 months is the iOS 14 to 15 update and the impacts it had really on Facebook advertising and attribution. Brands that were really exclusively focused on Facebook and haven't figured out how to pivot away from that have really struggled. over the last year, and that's been more than macroeconomic impact. I think Facebook marketing has been the biggest impact to declining revenues in the e-commerce space that I've seen.
Yeah.
Now, we've seen brands that had that initial impact and then have recovered pretty well. They've gone more into omni-channel paid traffic sources. Brands that are using influencer marketing models or have pivoted into TikTok successfully have recovered, rebounded, and continued to grow. But that's been the nature of e-commerce. It's a type of industry where you've got to stay at the front end of the technology curve to be competitive.
Yep. Thanks for sharing that, Isaac. That was very useful, and I think our audience will learn a lot from the pointers you gave. Thank you for joining us. This episode was sponsored by ShopAgain.io, an AI-powered customer retention platform for e-commerce.